Hey guys, I'm T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, you make trendy and fun crochet tutorials twice a week, and if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. Today I'll be teaching how to make a classic raglan sweater. With the weather starting to turn, the love affair with sweaters continues. This time, raglan style, which I know a few of you will enjoy. There's some Suzette for our upper body detail with a dash above the cuffs, some clean ribs via back loop half doubles, and a simple but effective collar for when you want to wear a little bling bling. Speaking of, whether bling is your thing or you like to keep it low key, there is a pattern for you. We have hundreds of modern crochet patterns from flashy dresses and bikinis to the most reserved cardigans and sweaters, with new patterns weekly, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a big thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so I can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now, it's time to get on the show, so without further ado. For this project, any category 4 yarn will work, but I used a total of 300 grams of yarn, and that's 550 yards if you're stateside. As for tools, a 5.5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and a tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order, and enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us your favorite movie remake. My favorites are The Parent Trap and Freaky Friday. Details for the giveaway down below. We're using 4 stitches for this project, and they'll be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, half double crochet, and double crochet. This tutorial is for size small, but you can adjust it for your size, and we explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this top started, we're all going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Then we're all going to grab our 5.5mm hook, and we're all going to start by making a chain for our neckline. So we want to make sure that we have 4 stitch markers ready because this is going to be worked top down. We're all going to start by making an even number chain, placing the first chain about 1 inch away from mid-chest until our chain reaches the edge of our neck. I need a total of 2 inches or 5 centimeters, so I'll be making a chain 8. Now that I have my even number chain, I'm going to chain 1 extra and insert my stitch marker into that chain. Now I'm going to make another even number chain that reaches from the base of our neck, up and over our shoulder, to our back. Now I need a total of 4 inches or 10 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 14. Now that we have the shoulder portion of our chain, we're going to chain 1 extra and insert our stitch marker into that chain. We are now going to make another even number chain that reaches across our back. And we want to make sure that this portion of our chain is the width of the base of our neck. So I need a total of 4.5 inches or 12 centimeters. So from here, I'm going to make a chain 16. Now that we have the back portion of our chain, we are going to chain 1 extra and insert our stitch marker into that chain. And since we just worked our way across our back, we're now going to make the same chain that we made for our shoulder. So I made a chain that was 4 inches or 10 centimeters, and that was a chain 14 for me. And now that my shoulder chain is finished, chain 1 extra and insert my stitch marker into that chain. And now that the shoulder portion of our chain is finished, we're now going to make the same chain that we made when we started off this chain. So this is going to be 2 inches or 5 centimeters for me, and that's going to be a chain 8. The entirety of my chain is all finished. This is going to be the general shape of the piece that we're making, and if y'all have my numbers, I made a total of 64 chains. Now our first row is going to be a single crochet row. So from where we're at, we're going to block off that last chain and do a chain 1. Now that chain 1 does not count as a stitch, that's just our turning chain. And into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're going to insert with a single crochet. So bring your hook down into that second chain from your hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. That is our first single crochet. Let's do one more. Into that following chain, insert your hook, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. We're going to continue to put one single crochet into every chain, but I'll meet you back when we reach our first stitch marker. I've put one single crochet into every chain and I'm now at my stitch marker. All we're going to do is continue to put one single crochet into there, but we want to make sure that we're inserting our stitch marker into the top of that stitch so we know where each of our increases needs to be for the following row. So insert your hook into that chain. I'm going to take my stitch marker out for now, and then single crochet into that stitch marker stitch, and then be sure to insert your stitch marker into the top of that stitch. And from here, continue putting one single crochet into every chain, making sure that we're inserting our stitch markers into the same stitches on top of that chain. So now that our first single crochet row is all finished, we're now going to get started on our second row, which is going to be our first Suzette stitch row. So we're going to need to start with an increase of 3 half double crochets. So at the edge of this row 1, we're going to chain 2 and flip our work. Into the last stitch from our previous row, we're going to insert with 3 half double crochets. So yarn over, insert your hook in through that first stitch with 1 half double crochet. So we're going to pull through all 3. Let's do this again. Yarn over into that same first stitch, insert, pull through all 3. There's 2 half double crochets, and then there is one more into that same first stitch. So we should all have 3 half double crochets into that first stitch. Now to do our Suzette stitch, it's going to be a single crochet and double crochet into that same stitch. So what we're going to do right after our increase is skip this first stitch, and then into this second stitch that we have, insert with a single crochet, and then into that same stitch, a double crochet. So yarn over into that same stitch that our single crochet is in, insert, pull through 2, pull through 2. That is our first Suzette stitch set. Let's do this again. Now after every Suzette stitch set, we're always going to need to skip that following stitch, because if we work into there, we'll be accidentally increasing, because the double crochet that we just did counts as that stitch. So we're going to skip the following stitch, and then into the stitch right after with, again, a single crochet, and then into that same stitch again, a double crochet. Now all together we should have our increase of 3 half doubles, and then 1, 2 Suzette stitch sets. We're going to continue to do our Suzette stitch sets until we are 1 stitch right before our stitch marker. So just to do the next one together, we are going to skip that following stitch into the stitch right after, a single crochet, and then also a double crochet. Now you're going to continue to do just the Suzette stitch sets until we are 1 stitch right before our stitch marker, and since I am there, we're going to do our following increase together. So for everyone, for every size, we should have all met back when we had 1 stitch right before our stitch marker, and into each of our stitch markers, we're going to be doing an increase of 3 half double crochets, just like how we started off this row. So I'm going to take out the stitch marker for now. I'm going to skip that following stitch, and then into that stitch right after that, which should have been my stitch marker stitch, insert with 3 half double crochets. So there is 1, there is 2, and then there is 3 half double crochets, and we want to make sure that we're inserting our stitch marker into that second half double crochet that we made so we know where the middle is. And from here, it's basically just going to be a repeat of what we just did until we reach the end of the row. So let's do the first one. Now after each of our increase of 3 half double crochets, we're going to be working directly into that following stitch with our first Suzette stitch set. So this is where my increase of 3 is. Into that following stitch, insert with our Suzette stitch set. So a single and a double crochet. From here, skip one stitch, into the next, insert with a single, a double, and just to do one more set together, skip one, into the next stitch, a single, and a double. Continue to do our Suzette stitch sets until we are all one stitch right before our stitch marker. So we've now made our way down with our Suzette stitches. We have one stitch right before our stitch marker left, and we're going to do our increase together just once more. So take out that following stitch marker, and from here we're going to do an increase of 3 half double crochets into that same stitch that our stitch marker was in. So yarn over, skip that following stitch, and then into the stitch right after that, which should have been our stitch marker stitch, an increase of 3 half double crochets. So there's 1, there is 2, and there is 3 half double crochets, all into that same stitch. And now from here, don't forget to insert your stitch marker into that middle stitch that we made, or that second half double crochet. So just as a reminder, right after an increase of 3 half doubles, our first Suzette stitch set is going to be worked into the stitch directly after. So insert with your first Suzette stitch set. At each of our stitch markers, do an increase of 3 half double crochets, remembering to insert our stitch marker into the middle stitch. And I will meet you back right after we do our last increase of 3 half double crochet that's worked into our last stitch marker stitch. So I made my way almost all the way around with my Suzette stitch sets, making sure that we're doing an increase of 3 half double crochets into those stitch marker stitches, and we just have the little front panel left to work into. Now this last half of the collar that we have to do needs to mirror the first half of the collar. So right after we do our increase of 3 half double crochets, just for this section, instead of working directly into the following stitch, we're going to do our Suzette stitch sets into the stitch right after, but the rest of it is going to be per usual. So we're just going to skip that following stitch, and then into the stitch right after that, our Suzette stitch set, and then from here, skip the following stitch, into the stitch right after, another Suzette stitch set, and continue to do our Suzette stitch sets until we have 2 stitches left. So I'm nearly at the end of my row 2, and we should have 2 stitches left. Into that last stitch, we're now going to do an increase of 3 half double crochets. So starting with the yarn over, we are going to insert our hook into that last stitch. So we're skipping that second to last, and into the last with 1, into that last with 2, and then into that last with 3 half double crochets. And just to double check our work, we should have the same amount of sets for this last section as we have for the first section. So in between my increase of 3 half double crochets, I have 1, 2, 3 sets. So let's just double check the other side for me. In between these increases, I have 1, 2, 3 sets as well. And now that we have that all squared away, let's get started on the following row. So let's all chain 1 and flip our work. Now we're only going to be increasing into the beginning and to the end of every other row. So since we just did an increase into the beginning and the ends of our row 2, we're now going to get started with our row 3, starting with a Suzette stitch. So right after we chain 1 and flipped our work, insert your hook into that last stitch from our previous row with a single and double, so with a regular Suzette stitch set. And from here, skip 1 into the following, a single and double, and just to do one more set, skip 1 stitch, a single and double. And we're going to continue to do our Suzette stitch sets until we are 1 stitch right before our stitch marker. And just as a really quick tip, each of our Suzette stitch sets should be worked into the previous row's single crochet to get the texture that we want. So I am back, and I have 1 stitch left right before my stitch marker. And just like our previous row, into our stitch marker stitches, we're going to be doing an increase of 3 half double crochets, remembering to insert our stitch marker into that second stitch that we made so we know where the middle is. Now this first portion is finished up. Working along the shoulder portion, it's going to be a repeat of our previous row. So directly into that following stitch, do our first Suzette stitch set. So working into that stitch that is right after our increase of 3, we're going to do our Suzette stitch set. So insert with a single and then with a double. And again, skip the following stitch into the stitch right after, which should be a single crochet from our previous row, a single and double, and continue this until you are one stitch right before our following stitch marker. And now that we're at our stitch marker stitch, we should be one stitch right before that stitch. So take out your stitch marker and then into that stitch marker stitch, insert with an increase of 3 half double crochets. And be sure to insert your stitch marker into that middle stitch or the second half double crochet that we made. And from here we're going to repeat. So just do the first one, insert your hook into that following stitch right after our increase of 3 half double crochets. With our Suzette stitch, skip a stitch, do another Suzette stitch. And we're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way around until we finish our last increase of 3 half double crochets into that last stitch marker stitch. So we've made our way all the way around. We are nearly finished with our row 3. We just have to do the last section, so the front panel section, and then we can move on. So now for this last section, we just finished up our increase of 3 half double crochets. We are now going to do our first Suzette stitch set into the stitch that is directly right after that increase, because this side needs to mirror this side that we have over here. So right after our increase of 3 into the stitch right after that, a single and double, and this is going to continue on per usual, so skip a stitch, into the stitch right after that, a single and double, and we're going to continue this until we have one stitch left. Now we have made our way all the way down. We have one stitch left. Into that last stitch, we're going to insert with a half double crochet. And now our row 3 is finished. Now we're just going to make sure that we have the same amount of sets on both sides. So right here, from my last set all the way until I reach my increase, which is right over here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets here. And just to double check along the other side, from my first set all the way over to my increase, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets. Now from here, it's going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows. So let's just chain 2, flip our work, and get started on our row 4. So getting started on our row 4, or any even number row, we're going to start and end with an increase of 3 half double crochets. So right after our chain 2, into that last stitch from our previous row, we are going to insert with 3 half double crochets. So there's 1, there's 2, and there is 3. Right after our increase of 3, we're going to skip that following stitch, which is a double crochet from our previous row. We can tell because it's just a little bit taller. And into the following stitch, do our Suzette stitch set. So a single and a double. And continue doing this until we have one stitch left before our stitch marker. So I've made my way down with my Suzette stitches. We should all have one stitch right before our stitch marker. And just like before, into that stitch marker stitch, do an increase of 3 half double crochets. So yarn over, skip that following stitch, and into the stitch right after, which should have been our stitch marker stitch, an increase of 3 half double crochets. So there's 1, 2, and 3, and don't forget to insert your stitch marker into that second stitch or the middle stitch. Now working along the shoulder, right after our increase of 3 half double crochets, we're going to insert our hook directly into that stitch right after our increase with our Suzette stitch. So into that following stitch with a single and a double, skip the following stitch, which should be a double crochet from our previous row, into the following, a single and a double. We're going to continue this until we have one stitch left before our stitch marker. I've just worked my way down my shoulder portion. We are one stitch left right before our stitch marker. So do an increase of 3 half double crochets into there. There's my first, my second, and my third half double, and insert your stitch marker into that middle stitch or the second half double crochet that we made. Now working our way across our back, we're going to insert our hook into that stitch directly after that increase of 3 half doubles with our first Suzette stitch set. So a single and a double, skip a stitch into that following with a single and a double, and continue this until we have one stitch left before our stitch marker. Working our way across our back, we have one stitch left before our stitch marker, and into that stitch marker stitch, an increase of 3 half doubles again, and insert your stitch marker into that middle stitch. Working our way down our shoulder again, we're going to do our Suzette stitch, starting with the stitch directly after that increase of 3 half double crochets, until we have 1 stitch left before our stitch marker. We finished up our shoulder. Now into that stitch marker stitch, we're going to do an increase of 3 half double crochets while inserting your stitch marker into that middle stitch. Then to finish off our row 4, we're going to finish off the same way that we've been doing all the other sections for this row. So into that stitch right after that increase of 3 half double, we're going to go in with our first Suzette stitch set, and then do our Suzette stitch sets until we have 2 stitches left. We made our way down with our Suzette stitch sets. We should have 1, 2 stitches left. And into that last stitch, we're going to do an increase of 3 half double crochets because this is an even number row. Now our row 4 is all finished. Now getting started on our row 5, we're all going to chain 1 and flip our work since we're only increasing into the ends of every other row. Now getting started on our row 5 or any odd number row, this will not start and end with any increases. So just find the last stitch from our previous row and insert with our first Suzette stitch set and continue to do our Suzette stitch sets until we are 1 stitch before our stitch marker. Now that we've reached our first stitch marker, we're going to take that stitch marker out and we're going to do our increase of 3 half doubles. So skip that following stitch and then into that stitch right after that, which should have been our stitch marker stitch, an increase of 3 half doubles, and insert your stitch marker into that second stitch that we made. Now working along our shoulders, we're going to find that following stitch right after our increase of 3 and insert with our first Suzette stitch set. Skip a stitch and insert into that following with another Suzette stitch set and continue this until we are 1 stitch right before our following stitch marker. Now we are 1 stitch right before our stitch marker, so insert your hook in through there with an increase of 3 half doubles. Working across our back into that following stitch, start with your first Suzette stitch set and continue on until we are 1 stitch right before the following stitch marker again. We have just worked across our back. We are 1 stitch before our stitch marker, into that stitch marker stitch, an increase of 3 half doubles, while inserting your stitch marker into that second half double that we make, and working our way down our shoulder into that following stitch, start with your first Suzette stitch set, and I'll meet you back when we have just 1 stitch right before our stitch marker left. We are 1 stitch before our stitch marker stitch, so take it out, insert into that stitch marker stitch with an increase of 3 half doubles, insert your stitch marker into that second half double that we made, and then we're going to do the rest of our row. So into that following stitch, insert with your first Suzette stitch set, and continue this until we have 1 stitch left. And now that we have 1 stitch left, all we're going to do is half double crochet into that last stitch, because remember we only do an increase into the ends of the row into our even number rows. Now we have just finished our first 5 rows together. Now we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until this point that we have can touch in front of us, because we do want to leave a little bit of space for a small v-neck. Now just as a reminder, we're going to be doing an increase of 3 half double crochets into the ends of each of our even number rows. Each of our odd number rows will not have an increase. And they're going to be done pretty much the exact same way. The only difference is the very end. For our even number rows, we will have 2 stitches left and we're going to do an increase of 3 half double crochets into that last stitch. And then for our odd number row, we will have 1 stitch left and we're just going to do 1 half double crochet into that last stitch. I will meet you back right after an even number row, once when these 2 points can touch each other. I am back with my collar. I have a total of 8 rows and my height is just about 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters. Now from here we are going to connect our v-neck portion together. So all we're going to do is count up the first 2 chains that we made when we started this row and insert your hook into that second chain. When we have those 2 loops on our hook, we're going to yarn over, pull through both of those loops. That stitch that we made does not count as a stitch, that's just the stitch to connect it. Do a chain up of 1 and cut. So now that everything is connected, we're going to do half double crochets. So we're all going to start by inserting our hook into any one of the stitches that we have along the back. I'm just going to insert mine close to one of my stitch markers, and I'm going to insert my yarn onto my hook. But keep in mind that wherever you insert your hook, that is going to be where our seam will be. Now I'm going to chain 2, and then put 1 half double crochet into every stitch until we reach our stitch marker. So we're all going to start by inserting our hook into that same stitch that our chain 2 is in, with our first half double crochet, remembering that that chain 2 does not count as a stitch, we just needed the height. And continue putting 1 half double crochet into every stitch until we reach our first stitch marker. And now that we're at our stitch marker, we're going to maintain doing an increase of 3 half double crochets into that stitch. So I'm going to take my stitch marker out for now, yarn over and insert my hook into that stitch with 1, with 2, with 3 half double crochets, and I am going to be inserting my stitch marker into that middle stitch as well, just to know where to do our falling rows increases, and that's it. From here, we're just going to continue to put 1 half double crochet into every stitch. Whenever you reach our stitch marker stitch, we're going to be doing an increase of 3 half double crochets, and make sure to insert your stitch marker into that second half double crochet. Now we're just going to continue on with this half double crochet row until the underarm portion that we have within the front and the back panel can meet underneath our underarm, forming our armhole. And I will meet you back at the end of this row. So I am back. I'm a few rows in from where I left you guys off at. I just wanted to remind you how we're going to be slip stitching into that second chain and also how we're going to be working our way up to the next row. So since we've made our way all the way around, we're going to need to slip stitch into that second chain that we made when we started this row. So all together, we're going to count up 1, count up 2. Into that second chain, insert, yarn over, pull through everything, and that's going to be how we close off every row. Now to work our way up to the following row, chain 2 and flip your work. Now our rows from here on out are going to be back loop half double crochet rows to get this really nice ribbing. So the pattern itself is going to be done exactly the same way, just 1, now back loop half double crochet into every stitch, while maintaining the increase of 3 right where our stitch markers are at. So let's just do the first few back loop half double crochets together. We're all going to start with a yarn over. We're going to find that last stitch from our previous row. Now, since we did flip our work and we want to make sure that we are flipping our work after every row to maintain this ribbing that we have, we are going to have 1 stitch that our chain 2 is worked out of. We want to make sure that we're not working into that first stitch that chain 2 is out of, because that's the slip stitch that we made and that doesn't actually count as a stitch. So getting started on the first back loop half double crochet for this row, I'm going to skip that first stitch, which was actually the slip stitch from our previous row. So finding the last stitch from our previous row, I'm going to insert into that back loop, pull through, and half double crochet per usual. Let's do this again. Yarn over, finding that following stitch, inserting my hook into that following stitch's back loop, pull through all 3, and just once more, yarn over, into that next stitch's back loop, insert, pull through all 3. And that's it. We're going to continue this until our stitch marker stitches that we have can now form our armhole. So we're going to want to meet back once when these 2 stitch marker stitches that we have can reach underneath our underarm and touch each other, forming our armhole right over here. When we have that, I will meet you back to start working on the length of our body. So I am back and I have just formed my armholes. So I now have a total of 18 rows, and the total height that I have is just about 6 inches or 15 centimeters. Now since our stitch marker stitches can now reach each other underneath our underarm, I'm going to show you guys how we're going to connect our underarm corners together and then work on the length from there. All we're going to do is chain 2, flip our work, and put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch until we reach our first stitch marker stitch. I've just put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, and I have reached my stitch marker stitch. Now what we're going to do from here is fold our work in half, making sure that the front panel is on top of the back panel. Now from here, we're going to do a half double crochet that combines the front and back panel together. And that's going to be pretty simple. All we're going to do is yarn over, preparing for a regular half double crochet. I'm going to insert my hook into that stitch marker stitch within the front panel, and also within that stitch marker stitch within the back panel, yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. Should have a total of 3 loops on our hook now. So yarn over and pull through all 3 per usual. And from here, we're going to be working our way across the front now, so I'm going to turn my work over. And I'm going to continue to put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, now working all the way across to our next stitch marker. So I've made my way across my front panel and I have reached my following stitch marker. And now we're going to combine our front and back panel again. So we're all going to yarn over and insert our hook into that stitch marker stitch into the front panel, and then also insert into that stitch marker stitch into the back panel. We're going to yarn over and pull through those first 2 loops, leaving 3 loops on our hook. And then from here, yarn over, pull through all 3. And we're going to finish up this row by flipping our work and putting 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch working across our back, and then slip stitching into that second chain that we made when we started this row. So our row that connects our front and back panel are all finished. From here, we're just going to continue on with back loop half double crochets, now with absolutely no increases and no decreases, until we get the length that we'd like, so you can make this cropped, full length, or a dress. Right after we slip stitch into that chain space, we're just going to chain 2, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch. And I'll meet you back once we have the length of this all finished up. I am back, and I have just finished the length of my entire piece. Now I have a total, and that is counting from my first single crochet row all the way down to where I did a chain up of 1 and cut. I have a total of 55 rows, and my total length from where my single crochet row is all the way down to the bottom is 21.5 inches or 56 centimeters. But now that we have the body finished up, let's do the sleeve. So now that the length of our piece is all finished, we're going to get started on the sleeve. Now the sleeve is actually going to be done exactly the same way as the body, so just back loop half double crochet rows with no increases and no decreases until we get the length of the sleeve that we want, so you can make it short, 3/4, or long. But we want to make sure that we're inserting our hook and working in the right direction for the first row because we want to maintain the same ribbing that we have. So let's take a look at one of our sleeves. So this is my armhole opening that I have right here. Now we're going to be taking a look at that last row that we did. And into those stitches that we did, we're going to notice a teardrop shape that the top of our stitches make. Now taking a look at the teardrop shape, there's going to be a pointy end and then a rounded end. The rounded end is the direction that your previous row is working into. So what we're going to do is insert our hook and then work in through the opposite end. As you can see, my teardrop shape, my rounded end is working in this direction. So for my following row, I'm going to be working in the opposite direction. So let's all start by inserting our hook into the stitch that our stitch marker stitch is in, or if you have taken your stitch marker out, it's going to be the stitch that combined our front and back panel, so that stitch will be occupied. We are going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and do a chain up of 2. This chain does not count as a stitch, we just want the height, and all we're going to do is put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch. So we're all going to start with a yarn over, find our previous row's last stitch that we have and insert our hook in through that back loop, pull through all 3, and that's it. We're going to continue putting 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, and when we make our way all the way around, slip stitch into that second chain to close off this row. Now once we're done with this first row, we just want to make sure that the ribbing is consistent with the rest of our piece. So if the ribbing looks a little bit different, just make sure that you're working in the right direction for this first row. But after we slip stitch into that second chain, we're going to chain 2, flip our work because we want to maintain the ribbing again, and then put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, and that's basically it. And we're going to continue on with our back loop half double crochet rows with no increases and no decreases until we're about 1 inch above our elbow, or until whenever you feel like you want your sleeve to start decreasing. So I'll meet you back right after an even number row. So I'm back with the first half of my sleeve. I'm just about 1 inch above my elbow, and I have a total of 18 rows, counting from my first underarm row right over here. And also counting from this first underarm row, I have a total of 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters. And now from here, we're all going to do some decreases that eventually tapers down to our cuff. So these following numbers are going to be completely up to you. All we're going to do is do a half double crochet of 2 together, into the beginning, into the end, and then also into the outside of the rows, just so we have a really nice and sleek taper. And we're doing a double crochet 2 together to make it look like actual half double crochets instead of decreases. So let's get started on the first one. So what we're going to do is yarn over, making sure that we flipped our work right after we chain 2. We're going to find the last stitch from our previous row, making sure that it's not that slip stitch, insert into that back loop, pull through, should have 3 loops on our hook, so yarn over, pull through the first 2. We're also going to yarn over, insert our hook into that following back loop, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. We should have 3 loops on our hook, so yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. And as you guys can see, we're doing the half double crochet 2 together, so we can have a body here and a body here. And from here, we're going to be putting 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch until we're along the outside of our sleeve. So we put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch until we reach the outside of our sleeve. Now we're going to do another half double crochet 2 together. So it's going to be done the same way as the first one. All we're going to do is yarn over, insert our hook into that following stitch's back loop, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over again, into that following stitch's back loop, pull through 2, then yarn over, pull through all 3. And continue with our back loop half double crochets into the rest of the stitches until we have 2 left, because we're going to do another one together. So we've made our way down with our back loop half double crochets. We should all have 2 stitches left, and let's do another half double crochet 2 together. So yarn over, insert your hook into that second to last back loop, pull through 2, yarn over, into that last back loop, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through all 3. And now that we're at the end of the row, we're going to count up 1, 2, into that second chain that we made when we started this row, slip stitch into there, and now this row is finished. Now this decrease portion is going to be completely up to you. You can decrease every other row or every third, fourth, fifth, whatever you guys want, just as long as it starts to taper down until we're ready to do our cuff. Now I would suggest to have 2 half double crochet rows in between our decrease rows, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to have this decrease row, 1 half double crochet row with no increases and no decreases, a second back loop half double crochet row also with no increases and no decreases, and then the same decrease row. And I'm going to continue to do this until I'm about 1 inch right before I'm ready to start doing my cuff, because we are going to have our little Suzette stitch detail right above our cuff. So I will meet you guys back. I am back with the length of my sleeve. I have a total of 34 rows, and this length is just about 15 inches or 38 centimeters, and now we're all going to do just a tiny Suzette stitch detail before we do our cuff. So right after our last row, we're all going to chain 1 and flip our work. Now the end of this Suzette stitch row that we're about to do is going to be a little different for everyone, depending on if you have an odd number of stitches or even number of stitches for this last row that we did. Now for those of you that have my numbers, I actually have an even number of stitches, so we will be left with 3 stitches. For those of you that have an odd number of stitches, you will have a total of 2 stitches left. So let's just do our first Suzette stitch set together. We're all going to start by finding that last stitch from our previous row, making sure we're not working into that slip stitch, insert with a single, and then into that same stitch, a double crochet. Doing this again, we're going to skip that following stitch, because if we don't, we will accidentally be increasing, because this double crochet counts as this following stitch, and into the stitch right after, a single and a double. And just once more, skip that following stitch, into the stitch right after, another single and double, and I'm going to continue to do mine until I have a total of 3 stitches left, because remember, I ended on an even number of stitches. For those of you that have an odd number, I will meet you back when you have 2 stitches left. Now my first Suzette stitch row is nearly finished. I have a total of 1, 2, 3 stitches left. And some of you may just have 2 stitches left. But no matter if we have 3 or 2 stitches left, all we're going to do is half double crochet into the last stitch from our previous row. So yarn over. So I'm going to skip 1, skip 2, and half double crochet into that last stitch. For those of you that just have 2 stitches, skip that second to last stitch, and into that last stitch, insert with a half double crochet to close off our row. And now from here, we're going to slip stitch into that chain that we made when we started off this row, So insert your hook, yarn over, pull through, and we're going to do a few more Suzette stitch rows until we're ready to do our cuff. Now I left enough space for just about an inch or an inch and a half of Suzette stitch rows. So I'm going to chain one and flip my work, making sure that we are always flipping our work after our Suzette stitch row. And I'm going to continue to do my Suzette stitch row until I have the length of the Suzette stitch detail that I want. So just to do this first row, we're going to insert our hook into that last stitch from our previous row, which should be the top of that half double crochet, and insert with our first Suzette stitch set. So single and double. Skip that following stitch, which should be a double crochet from our previous row because it's a little bit taller than the following, and into that next stitch, single and double. Now for this row, we should all have a total of 2 stitches left at the end of the row, so I'll meet you back when we all have 2. So I'm now at the end of my second Suzette stitch row, and we should all have 2 stitches left. And all we're going to do is yarn over, skip that second to last stitch, and into the last stitch, insert with a half double crochet, and then we're going to slip stitch into that chain space that we made when we started this row. Chain 1, flip our work, and continue to do our Suzette stitch detail with no increases and no decreases until we're ready to do our cuff. So I am completely finished with my Suzette stitch rows. I did a total of 4 of these rows, and I now have a total of 38 rows for my sleeve. My total length for my sleeve is now 16 inches or 41 centimeters, and now we're going to start working on our cuff. So from here, we're going to make a chain the length that we'd like for our cuff to be, and I'd like for mine to be about 3 inches or 8 centimeters, so I made a chain 12. Now that we have our chain, we're going to block off that last chain and do a chain 1. That chain 1 does not count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. And then into that chain that we blocked off with a second chain from our hook, we're going to insert, pull through everything with a slip stitch. Let's do this again. Into that next chain, insert your hook, yarn over, and gently pull through both loops on our hook. And we're going to continue to put 1 slip stitch into every chain. And just as a really quick tip, make sure that we're not tugging too tightly after every stitch, otherwise the following row could be too tight to work into. And now that we're back at the base, we're going to slip stitch it into the base. So find that next available stitch into the base, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through everything to connect our row 1. And that slip stitch doesn't count as a stitch, we just needed to connect it. And we do need to work our way up to the following row as well, so slip stitch into that next stitch into the base, also doesn't count as a stitch, and flip our work. And now we're going to be doing back loop slip stitches. So we're going to find that last stitch from our previous row, insert into that back loop, yarn over, and gently pull through everything. Again, find that next stitch's back loop, insert, and pull through everything, and we're going to continue putting 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch till we reach the end of the row. At the end of the row, chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch again, and I'll meet you back at the base once more. And now that we are back at the base, we're going to find that next stitch into the base to connect it, slip stitch it into there, and then to work our way up to the following row again, slip stitch into that next stitch into the base. Those 2 slip stitches into the base don't count as a stitch. Flip our work and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. We're going to continue to do our back loop slip stitch rows with no increases and no decreases, making sure that we're connecting it into the base the same way that we just did until we don't have any more stitches left. Then I'll meet you back so we can seam everything together. So I've made my way all the way around with all of my back loop slip stitch rows. We don't have any more stitches left to work into, so now we're going to seam it together. So first things first, let's make sure that our work is flipped right side out. Then we're going to insert our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, yarn over, pull through everything, and now we're going to do an outside loop slip stitch seam. So let's all start by finding that first available stitch into the front panel and insert only in through that front loop. Find that next stitch into the back panel and insert only in through that back loop and pull through everything on our hook. Let's do this again. Next stitch into the front panel, insert, next stitch into the back panel, insert, and pull through everything, and that's it. We're going to continue to do this until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then repeat everything we just did here on the other side. So now that both of our sleeves are finished, the last thing we're going to have to do is our collar. So first things first, let's make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up, and we're going to insert our hook into the top corner stitch of our neckline. We're now going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and we're going to start by making a chain the length that we'd like for our collar to be. And I'd like for mine to be about 1 inch or 2 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 4. Now that we have our chain, we're going to block off that last chain, do a chain 1 and into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, insert with a slip stitch, and that's it. Continue putting 1 slip stitch into every chain. And now that we've made our way down towards the base, we're going to slip stitch it into the base the same way that we did for the cuff. So find that next stitch into the base, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through everything. That slip stitch does not count as a stitch. And then we need to work our way up to the following row, so slip stitch into that next available stitch as well. That slip stitch also doesn't count as a stitch, and now we're going to be doing back loop slip stitches. So flip our work, find that last stitch from our previous row, insert in through that back loop with a slip stitch, and that's it. We're going to continue putting 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. At the end of the row, we're going to chain 1, flip our work, and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and when we reach the base, we're going to connect it the same way that we did for the cuff. And we're going to continue this, making our way all the way around our neckline until we reach the other corner. Once we do, we're going to do a chain up of 1 and cut. So I've made my way all the way around with my back loop slip stitch collar, and I did do a chain up of 1 and cut once when I reached my other corner point. And the last thing that we're going to have to do is just single crochet along the inside of our neckline to clean everything up. So let's all start by making sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up, and then we're going to be inserting our hook into the top corner stitch of our collar. Next, we're going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure, and we're going to start by putting 1 single crochet into every stitch into our collar. So we should have the same amount of stitches as chains made for our collar. So if you guys have my numbers, I made a chain 4, so I will have 4 single crochets. And now that we put 1 single crochet into every stitch, working into our side Suzette stitch rows, we're going to alternate between 1 to 2 single crochets into every side row. So everyone's first side row should be a side single crochet row, because remember that's the first row that we did for this entire piece. So we're going to find that top loop within that side row and insert into that loop and insert with 1 single crochet. Now the next thing we're going to do is find our following Suzette stitch row, find that top loop, and then insert your hook into there with 2 single crochets. So I'm going to find that top loop and insert with 1, and then into that same top loop with 2 single crochets. Let's do this again. This is my following side row right over here. I'm going to find that top loop and insert with just 1 single crochet. And that's it. We're going to continue to do that, making our way all the way down to reach the point. So let's just do 1 more together. Now I just put 1 single crochet into our last side row. So finding our following side row, we're going to find that top loop and insert with 2 single crochets. So there's 1, and then there's 2. And again, this is my following side row. I'm going to insert into that top loop with just 1, and I'll meet you back at the point of our neckline. And now that I worked all the way down into my last side Suzette stitch row, we're now going to do the same thing on the other side, working our way up. So from here, let's just turn our work just a little bit and insert our hook into our first side row. Now working our way up this side, we're just going to find that next side row, insert your hook into there with just 1 single crochet, and that's it. Continue to alternate between 1 to 2 single crochet into every side row. Once we reach our collar, we're going to be putting 1 single crochet into every stitch, and then when we reach the top, do a chain up of 1 and cut. We're all done, and now the last thing I'm going to do is weave in all of our ends. And there you have it. Hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. All of those links are down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch you on the next one. Bye!